Good evening, dear listening audience and viewing audience. Welcome to our second of a series of bi-monthly meetings, sessions I should say, in the form of dialogue. These sessions are presented by Masjid Muhummad, and the concept in which these dialogues or sessions are built upon is on perceptions for progress. Perceptions for progress. We'll be dealing with tonight the subject of, and I quote, family and the young adult. That's the subject of the night that we'll be discussing with our panelists. And we have as our panelists tonight, beginning with the leader of the Muslim community on Cedar Avenue, Masjid Muhammad, Imam Basim Muwakkil. Welcome.
Thank you.
We have alongside of me to my right, Miss Tracy Sharif, Youth Coordinator of Masjid Muhammad, Cedar Avenue. Welcome, Tracy. And we have beside me on my left, someone who is pinch hitting tonight. Because we advertised that we were going to have Miss Aziza Furbert, a parent, and Mr. Desmond Crockwell, who is the director of Youth Visions Promotions. But those two, unfortunately, were not able to make it. So we have pinch hitting tonight on a moment's notice, our dear brother, our friend, our community activist, our historian, and all of that, Dr. Radat. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel.
Thank you very much for accepting our request to make this night the best night we could have. We're going to start off tonight, before we get to a series of questions, we're going to have the beginning of our panelist representation with a presentation from Imam Basim Muwakkil. It's yours, Basim.
Okay, thank you. We want to thank God and the committee for giving us this opportunity to share thoughts, concepts with you on the topic of young adults. During my short lifetime, generally speaking, I have not seen a generation that has come after me in which the people have not said, what is the matter with the youth? Unfortunately, the problem that exists when I was a boy exists now. Very little has changed except the speed in which bad news travels. I also believe that the youth are given more choices than we had, and most of those choices are not really helpful to them. It adds to their difficulties in making good choices. In fact, I would say so much of it is designed to mislead them. I speak of youth in their early teens or preteens, when they start to grow hair under their arms and all other places. For girls, when their monthly cycle starts. If they don't have a solid foundation by then on which to build, given to them by the parents or society, then it will be much easier for them to be led astray. Children will be children, experimenting with life. It is up to us adults to lay a strong moral foundation for them to build upon. And it's up to them to either accept it or reject it. Most will accept it. I am of the opinion that it is the adults not working with a plan of integrity and love that will help our children navigate through their early life with less problems. Adults need to find better ways, us as adults, we need to find better ways to convey our life experience to our children that will help them navigate through their early life with less problems. The last time we spoke here, I spoke on building on sound ideas and the best ideas. But if we don't believe in them, then we can't build upon them. I am talking about parents and the network of social support, all building on many ideas that will raise our community to a standard where we are well pleased. That is, we can see maturity in them at a very young age because we put them on the path of maturity and responsibility at that young age. So that is my opening statement, and we can move on from there.
What's interesting right off out of the gates for me, which you reflected right away, when you interchanged the word young with the term youth. Now, this is not to say that something was wrong with that. I believe that we need to at least make sense of why we use certain terms or terminologies to say the same things. And oftentimes we are saying the same things with little variations. I believe that it's times like this that we need to have a greater clarity as to how and why we see the subject matter like we do. For instance, when you said just now about young people and their sexuality when it comes around to puberty. Now, with the young adult, we're talking about a middle range between childhood and adulthood, which is young adult. This definitely requires for us to understand what the adult is and what's expected from the adult, who the child is and what's expected from children that we sometimes call youth, but we're speaking about young adults. And I believe that in between this discussion tonight, we should have a clarity of exactly what that really covers. When I think about the subject, Ms. Sharif, you being the coordinator of youth, I'm now on the subject of defining young adult, defining youth. How do you say on that subject?
Bismillah. Thank you, Brother Cromwell, for having me on your show this evening. The first thing I would address will be the culture that people live in, because that definition of youth or young adults can vary between different countries, depending on the culture that you're raised in. I just think back, the prophets back in the days were probably 18, 19, when they were being sent to wars and things like that. They had responsibilities that our young people don't have today. So this responsibility of the young adult maybe may consider over the age of 18. We say the voting age is at 18, so we may consider after 18 that they're young adults. But before youth, 18 and under, I would like to think at that level or at that age, the child has done a certain amount of schooling or they've acquired a certain amount of knowledge, which can take them to a level of understanding to some responsibility of adulthood. So you kind of start to put them into the respect of young adults after that age. I think before that age of 18, we can create that environment which gives that child enough or sufficient knowledge to create the information that's required to take them into learning more about what it is that their responsibilities are as adults or coming into adulthood. So I think it really relies on culture sometimes when we pick out who's the youth and who's the young adult. I think it makes a big difference in the culture that we're raised in.
Right away, you know, you're on point on something that is oozing out in a good way for me right now. Here it is. It's a fact that the age of majority in Bermuda is 18. When we think about looking up into the dictionary post, very few explanations of young or youth puts an age to it. They put categories like maturity, adolescence, puberty, full grown, up of age. They very seldom give an age. So that brings to mind how different cultures arrive at the rite of passage, which is from childhood into responsibility. we need to understand what it is that when we hear someone, wherever we find them, asking of our young people to be accountable and responsible. Dr. Tanky.
Yeah, so perhaps I want to underscore a bit of what Tracy alluded to in terms of the variation of cultures and how different societies define youth and young adult. I think what's critical, though, and perhaps this is why they don't really allude to an age, because it's more so a stage. I think young people arrive at a stage, and the key issue in arriving at that stage is experience or knowledge. What has been in their life that has allowed them to acquire this level of awareness or to reach this stage? And so when we talk about the age of being 18 as a voting age, okay, 18 is the time frame, but something should occur before you get to 18. So 18 is just not that magic number, and I think that's part of our problem. We say, well, you're 18, so you should be able to do this. But the question is, what has transpired in that process? So that by the time you get to 18, you fully understand what the requirements are of you, i.e., if it is voting, in some cases, whether or not you're prepared to go to college. And so different societies over generations have used various activities to prepare young people for that level of responsibility. And I think perhaps one of our issues is the idea of how well are we preparing youth toward young adults.
What time does a parent decide, just like we know creatures, animals, they know for their young ones to survive the wild, they could only play for so long in the jungle. If they play too long, they become prey.
Right.
The responsible adult in that creature community knows that they must prepare their young one to take care of themselves at the right time, because it will be to their peril if they do. Now, here it is, just today, in glimpsing the paper, and I pulled up from it, the Heritage Month theme is giving us an opportunity to think about what binds us together. How do we pull together during times of tragedy and need? That's the only part I pulled out. Because this idea of dealing with family and young adults, make no mistake, we came up with this idea because we want to be relevant.
Sure.
We want to be relative. We know our people,
Sure.
because I'm not accepting that it's children killing each other.
Right.
I'm not accepting that it's youth killing each other, because those ages are up and down. They're varied. The victims are very young sometimes, but more of the perpetrators are older people.
Yep.
So let us get it right, dear listening audience, dear community. This subject is a grave subject when it comes around to us understanding what role do we play in conditioning our children that we say are now needing help in times of tragedy. How are we to look at them? Mr. Muako, you have a congregation. How are you addressing this? How are you looking at this when it comes around to the overall picture? Because I don't see any community leader overlooking that this subject must be dealt with in some form or another within the community when it comes around to giving guidance.
Well, let's go back again. If we don't get them at an early age, by the time they reach their puberty, they should be independent.
Yes.
But I think one of the problems is the picture of success. What society has is as a picture of success. And anything that is outward is given to us as a picture of success. Maybe, okay, you got a house, you got a car, you got certain clothes, but nobody deals with the soul. And so our picture of success would be a peaceful soul. You may have the other things, but our main objective in life should be to attain a peaceful soul. because the commercials have us looking at this and that, and this is what you need, and this is what you want, and this is what you're going to get. And those youngsters, they go after it. If they don't have a solid foundation, then they have little hope. But we say God is merciful,
Yes.
and he guides whom he pleases, and he helps whom he pleases. So the main thing is for us is that inner being, that inner self, in which we need to develop. And there are many chapters of the Quran which would help us to develop.
So, Brother Bam, you raised an interesting point in terms of how we in the Muslim community define success as it relates to the peacefulness of the soul. And I perhaps would like to think that we can extend it a little further too, because what it is important is we're doing the defining. And I think for too long, this particular society, we hear many people using the phrase it's very materialistic. And so we progressed economically or materialistically, but we have regressed spiritually in some ways. And I believe that's having a profound impact on the youth, not just the youth today, but all people today. Because there's a focus on attaining something that has been defined as success at all odds. What's happening in the process is that we've lost some values, which helps to provide that level of stability in the family. And so I would say perhaps as a perception for progress is families now need to revisit how are we defining success. And I'll say this, using a practical example, recently, and there's been a lot of death in Bermuda. And so we've all lost loved ones. I've recently lost a few aunties on both my mom and my father's side. And what the families are saying is, you know what? We need a reunion. We need to come closer together. So in a sense, for me, that's a level of success, or that's a perception for success, whereas we are becoming more bonded. We see the need because we've lost a loved one. We've lost human life. And so the loss of human life usually tends to bring us back to some reality, right? Yeah. And so it begins to put things in perspective. So much like our grandfathers and our ancestors, the family was the hub of it. I remember our mothers and our fathers bringing us together and taking us on picnics, keeping everybody engaged, keeping us well intact, right? We've moved away from that somewhat. So I think we have to now redefine what it means to bring the family back, what it means to be cohesive, the aspect of togetherness as the government is putting up. What will we do to ensure that our families stay intact?
And when I'm talking about a peaceful soul, we might have to fight to get that peaceful state, to get to that peaceful state. May have to fight our own egos or the egos outside of ourselves to get to that peaceful state. So it's not just, that I think of the hippie days in the 60s and early 70s, that kind of peace, It's a peace in which you are willing to fight, to struggle, to save our children, to save ourselves.
I think they always say when the child reaches the age of 18, you've kind of missed the boat if you haven't given them the spiritual guidance at an early age. Because two things that are very, very strong will be to give that child some consciousness, some spiritual consciousness in knowing that he was created. He was created by one God. He has to be acknowledged. He has to be worshipped. The devotion also has to come along with that. So if we're not giving this to our children before they reach that trifling age, as they say, where you have to get out there and you have to work and you have to become an adult, it may appear to be trifling to them. For us, it's just responsibility. It doesn't have to be difficult. The peace comes with that, knowing that you have that sense of security. You have that go-to. You know that there's a God that you can talk to, that you can pray to, that you can look for answers to. If you're not getting that in school or if you're not getting it at home, you still have that as a security. So it builds your self-esteem and makes you a stronger adult. I think a lot of things like things that were removed, like religious studies from schools, prayer from schools, things that they're attempting to remove even, those things are going to be detriment to our children. They will be detriment to our children in the long run, because those are the things that hold a child tight to his foundation in knowing that he has a future, a bright future. He doesn't have to rely on materialistic things. He doesn't have to rely on social media directing his path or what have you. He's not disturbed by being different. He's not disturbed by being criticized or anything like that. He has that strong self-worth. And I think those are the things that we can ask our young people today, what are some of the things that they want? Because a lot of the times the adults can talk to what they think the child wants, but do we ask the children what they want or what they feel would help them in the generations that they're living in now? It's not like well, money is always kind of a subject, but a lot of young people are still home with their parents because of the cost of living in Bermuda. So they may say, well, I want to be on my own, but I can't afford to be on my own. I want to be an adult, but I'm not being given the opportunity to be an adult because I can't afford it. What are the things that we can do to assist with that? You know, you give them opportunities in something else, showing their talents, where their talents can actually help them to generate better revenue for themselves. Not being sidetracked or guided by the social media realms of life, telling you what it is that you should do in order to be successful. So I think, you know, like Brother Imam said, the worth, if we are relying on social media to predict our worth, we would always have issues. We would always have difficulty. But if we give that foundation to our children, the spiritual foundation that our children need, before they hit that critical age where they become rebellious or they're looking for something to identify themselves with, then we'll be running into a lot of problems.
We know in reality that many religious bodies are suffering with children coming or staying in the church or staying in the mosque or staying in the synagogue. We're losing our children.
Yes.
That's a fact. We have more women settling down to be morally correct than men in these same orders. We're talking about a reality that our children are displaying that they don't feel that confident that they can live a moral life and be okay in the world that they're living in. Now, that's part of what I'm hearing from them. So much so that I don't find myself having to ask them what they want. Most times, they're able to tell me how they're thinking without me asking. Now, what I see as a very important thing, because we had the question here about values and behavior and all that, but because of how strong this point we're on is, I'm looking at the relevance between the first stage of a child's life, which is childhood. And they say a child is not mature. They are immature. We now are saying we're now addressing the young adult. So we're talking about the expectation of that young adult having a sense of intellect that will put him in the category of being mature. Are we really seeing an intellect that we feel as though we adults can address in these young adults that would have them to accept their responsibility?
Well, if we don't put it there, if we don't lay the foundation, it's not going to be there. So we have to lay the foundation, and that's where we're lacking. Again, perception for progress. Most of what we have, most of our goals as blacks on this island the standard has been set by those that were in authority.
Yes.
We believed in God, yes, but we know we had to obey those that were in authority.
Yes.
But now we have a book that tells us, listen, there is only one God, and you all have the same right to worship that God in the way that you see him. And so now we have to look at God, the standard that God has set for all of mankind. Because we keep looking at everything else, we would fail. And in reading the stories in the scripture, we see where God made all his prophets and the believers independent of no matter what system they were in. He made them independent. So we read the story of Moses and Pharaoh and Abraham and Joseph. All of this, God made them independent in powerful lands.
Yeah.
But we have to have that faith.
You sound like you want to say something.
Well, I mean, the point is about, independent. And I take it a step further and use the definition or describe it as independent thinking. Because I think that's, you got to be in that thought process in order to carry out the action or the behavior, right? And so again, it goes back to how are we conditioning our young people, our children, to be independent thinkers or responsible thinkers? Because, you know, we don't become as adults one day and say, now we're here. There's a process that occurs along the way. So how do we develop a younger person to become independent in his or her thinking? And I think that's part of our charge.
And we're also talking about adults. We as adults have problems.
Well,
So we have to clear that up. You
no,
know?
absolutely, absolutely.
And these
And we-
young people see those
And they
problems.
see
Yes.
it. They see it.
That's,
They see
that's,
it.
that's the big problem.
I mean,
Yes. In fact, this brings to mind, which is a good segue to the next question, because when children see hypocrisy as relates to, we're saying one thing and they say they see the result of the way we're living producing something else. They hear us saying things, but the action it's not congruent.
Right.
So, do we really feel comfortable when we think about our children understanding their responsibility as a young adult? How do we feel about that? Are we expecting them to deliver because we believe they understand? What's the reality in that area?
I guess the reality would be that if
'Cause we're talking about role playing here.
I would say
if we give our children chores to do, if we tell them that they are a part of a family, let them know they are part of the family, and they are part of the strength of that family, we can see the ones who take on those chores, who take on those responsibilities, and we can see the ones who are lacking. So now I'm just learning this at an older age. I wish I would have learned something.
It's never too late.
So I don't want to think like that's what I've done, you know,
Right.
because I made those mistakes, but I could see it now. And maybe I'm becoming more mature. But there's other things you can't expect for somebody to know something if you don't show them or tell them.
yeah. So I think, yeah, I know, Tracy, you want to say something?
I was speaking about capabilities. I think we need to recognize the capabilities of when we're asking what we're asking of our young people too. A lot of young people may say, I don't have the capability to do that, or they don't feel comfortable doing it, or they don't have the know-how
Yeah.
to do things. And we just assume and we take for granted that all of what we know is something that they should know, or all of what we know, or how we learned it,
Sure.
they should automatically know it. So
Sure.
we definitely should identify, first of all, the capabilities of what tasks we're giving our young people to do, and stop giving so much freedom that they go beyond those boundaries, even doing things they may not know are necessarily wrong, but put some limits on those boundaries, give them boundaries and say, you know, you can do it to that, let me see how well you can handle that, and then give them another level of that capability after that to see how far they can actually go, and then you just progressively get to a better understanding of what it is that child's capable of, and give them encouragement, and don't take away from the talents that they feel they have and say, you know, you're not capable of doing it. Allow them to see what it is that they are capable of doing.
I
Give
think
them
the
that
other
chance.
piece. I think the other piece to it as well, Cromwell, is the fact that, you know, when Basim highlighted, you know, the fact that he's still in that transition, because we all are.
No,
Yes,
nobody's
we all
perfect.
are.
We're constantly growing.
Yeah, we are.
Yes.
We are.
Mhm.
I think it's about demonstrating that behavior, right?
Yes.
I think being that example. I mean,
Mhm.
so even if, you know, we're assigning chores, can we demonstrate the chores? Are we doing it as a means of showing the expectation? I mean, because sometimes, you know, it's very easy to say, I want you to do the dishes. You know, yeah, okay. And dishes are pretty simple, but, you know, are we demonstrating exactly what's expected in terms of what comes along with that?
Yes.
You know, what comes along with it. I mean, it's a simple example, but I think that's how they better understand their expectation, to the extent that when they become a lot older and a lot more mature, I mean, you know, it's really about actually walking through it.
Yeah.
I think one of the greatest experiences I had with my family was taking everybody to vote. It wasn't just me, it was my wife and I. And so our sons have been 18. And so it was the first time they were voting. So I said, okay, this is a practical example. This is a practical exercise.
Yes,
And
yes.
so we went to the polls together. So
Yes.
now I'm not to tell you how to vote,
Yes,
although I may
yes.
have some influence, but at the
Yes.
same time, you know,
Yes.
hey, this is a moral responsibility.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I believe it's about demonstrating the expectation
Yes.
Yes.
of what it is that we want from our children, because many of them see the hypocrisy in us, right?
Yes.
I mean, and we all lived it.
Yes.
You know, I told don't do as I say, or don't do as I do. I want you to do
as
this
I
here.
say.
Do as I say, yeah, not as I do. You know how that goes.
Yeah, and a part of that there, being you're on that point, how many of us are somewhat afraid to have our children to understand where we were at their age?
Yeah, really.
And not put them in a difficult position when they get in a huddle with a member of the family and they start talking about their daddy or the mama or how they used to be. And they say, man, my daddy acts like an angel.
Yeah.
But he was less than that when he was young like me.
Sure.
And he doesn't make me feel as though
Sure.
that he understands that part.
Sure.
So what is it that we're not doing when it comes around to the behavior
And
on the family level, when it comes around to those relationships that's supposed to now grow into responsibility and community relationships, because it just doesn't stay home.
Right.
It's all involved. So are we saying to our children about our natural behavior, which was we were a little, devilish for a while?
I was no saint.
You know what I'm saying? And do we really think that it's okay for our children to understand that?
And I have something to say here. I had written this down. It said, nothing silences self-trust more than a child. Yeah, I do. Nothing silences self-trust more than forcing a child to do something that they're not capable of. So when a child is being forced to do something they know they're not capable of, and they get frustrated and they get angry because they feel like they're being pushed to do something that they don't feel like they're capable of, we have to pick up on those signs and recognize those signs, because that in turn may bring anger, it may bring frustration. And we see a lot of that in our young people. We see a lot of anger, and we wonder why our young people are so angry. And is it because they may feel like they're not getting what they feel like they need, which may be some form of guidance that we had that's missing from their lives, because a lot of what we had they're not getting, and we know for a fact that they're not getting a lot of that.
Yes.
They're not getting the love, they're not getting the attention, they're not getting the father's lap, the mother's bosom. They're not getting any of that anymore, and it's being left to our teachers to identify all of this in the schools, because this is where the children are spending most of their times, and the parents are working so hard, I guess, in trying to take care of the children, that they don't have time to give a lot of what the child needs that the teacher can't give. So it's a concern. It's a big concern, because we don't want anybody to feel left behind. They say no child left behind. It's very difficult when children are not getting that attention that they need. That's not funny. It's not funny to an infant, so it's not funny to a young adult.
Yes.
When a child is crying for attention, it hurts. We have young ladies or young women in our society right now, in our communities, that it's very concerning, the path that our young ladies are going down. They're being taught and expressing a lot of behaviors that we don't need for our children to be witnessing and our children to be identifying with as okay, because it's very disturbing in the future of that child. I've heard young men say, I can't stand my mama, I hate my mama because of how she dresses. How do you think your child looking at you or looking upon you without that good example is feeling right now? You're making that child very angry. It's frustrating, because they know that things can be battled, they know that things can be different, and that's what they're kind of seeking out. So
And
we can do better as
if
parents.
the
I think
environment
we can.
at home is not conducive to that child being open, then how do we get
Where does the
beyond that?
frustration? Yeah.
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 Look, I'm here reflecting on something, Tank, and you may remember it while I'm talking about it. When we were dealing with Club Respect, a group intended to help children that were having difficulties in their young life, and we made a masterful contribution to a group of kids in Bermuda who were destined to be behind bars. That's how serious it was, right? And 95% of those kids turned around. And one of the subjects that we delved into was collaboration. Now, when we got to look at a professional approach, a study of collaboration and how a child gets on the road to begin to learn how to work with each other, when I got to see the guidance that I was being given as an adult to give to children. Believe it or not, I got more from it than the children did.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that stood out, and I want to bring it out tonight because of what you said. Parents who see themselves as the authority, the last word, and do as I say, they give direction to a child who's growing, and they give this direction hoping that these children would respond the way they expect them to. The teacher in this collaboration course said, ask yourself a question. After you give that direction, how often do you ask that child, now do you understand what direction I gave you?
Sure.
Follow up. Yeah.
Do you understand what's expected of you now that I've given you that directive or that order and what's expected of you? Do you clearly understand that? How often do we stop and ask that question before we walk off and leave that child to do what we expect them to do? And then we come home and find out that they didn't do it, over uptight right away as though they disobeyed us.
Sure.
But the child's too young or afraid to say, but I didn't understand it. And hence, the next action is disapproval of the child's action, and the child's getting a double whammy now because they don't understand why they're getting punished because they're being now of the belief that my daddy believes that I disobeyed him, or my mama believes that I disobeyed her. Then I didn't understand. So when I got that as a parent, Tank, I'm telling you, mate, before we gave it to the kids at the program, I went home and had a family meeting, man. And I said, I put myself on the chopping block right now. I'm guilty. Yeah. And
We have to
believe
be
me,
respectful enough to acknowledge that we're not perfect as
Yes.
parents, and we do make mistakes, and we do have to listen. On my own, I at this not late stage, but like Brother Miriam said, we're not perfect. We learn as we go, and we just have to listen to what our children are telling us. And if they're saying that, they really don't understand something, we have to break it down and try to make them
Yes.
understand as best we can. Or what it is that we're expecting of them, we have to follow up on it and make sure, like you said, make sure they got it.
yes.
Don't just assume that they got it,
But
because we're leaving them out there.
perhaps I want to say too that, and whilst we're evolving, right? Because really that's what's transpiring.
Yes.
And we're coming from a position of how we were guided and directed as young children from our parents, right? Who had a sense of love, a different kind of love, but no different in terms of wanting the best for us. So I think, I wouldn't say we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. I just think we have to understand this generational change in terms of what's expected in today's time versus how we came through. And so, I mean, my kids say to me all the time, say, Dad, when we're growing up, it's not like how you guys were. Like, it's a different generation.
Definitely different.
And so it's, really, so it's forced me to pull back and say, you know what? It's true, man. It's a different space. So now I have to listen to their rationale as to why they're doing or not doing and how they're dealing with situations and put myself in that space and say, whoa, that's pretty challenging, man. And so it requires for us as parents to be a lot more reflective from a standpoint of what it is that we're asking and what do we want. Is this too demanding, or, is this safe? You know what I'm saying? So
I believe they are receiving a lot more information than we receive.
sure.
A lot more information. Now, got to process all of this.
It's too much.
Is this right or this wrong? Or do they just go into it and say, okay, I'm gonna swim in this.
Yes.
Let me see how it feels. So, but we were somewhat restricted in the amount of information that we had.
I think the discipline was a lot greater discipline, because you have boundaries. We have kids out there who are raising themselves. There's no limits. There's no boundaries to what they can do and what they're allowed to do. The stipulations on coming in from school, doing your homework, make sure your room's clean, get your supper. These boundaries are not there anymore. They don't even exist. It's a free for all. People are crossing paths in the same household now. There's no more sitting down to the table to eat anymore. All of the little things that can still happen even in this world that the growing up in, the small pieces that can actually still be in place, we just have to find those pieces and put them there, put them in place, because it's not an excuse anymore, that we don't guide our children the way that they should be guided, even if it means being a little bit more strict, even if it means asking more questions, even if it means following up on what it is that they're doing or what they've done for the day, talking to the teachers, see how they're making out in school. We need to still pull at all those little things that we know we can still do as parents. and ask the question, you know, how well are our children doing? Because that's important.
As I listened the last through 3 different presentations on this same point, are we really understanding and saying to each other as adults, as parents, the difference between the type of parent that we're having today? We're talking about parents with so little community support. The village is not there no more.
No.
The extended family is not there no more. The moral question used to be upheld by the extended family years ago. If and when, look, could you recall, and I know you would because I know
Yeah.
the type of family you came from, Ms. Sharif, when it comes down to the background in our families where if a young child got impregnated as a teenager, that child wasn't being told to go have an abortion. That child had the child, and the
raised
family
to be
took care of the
assisted.
child
That's right.
and tried to fill in the gaps until
That's
that
right.
child got to correct the ways that caused her to make the mistake.
Yes, yes.
And I remember being told that before the embarrassment came down on the family, they'll send the child, the baby, to another family so as the neighbors wouldn't be asking questions about this young child being such a young parent. Because the parents were trying to ease this thing in without the worst outcome of everybody morally, while trying to still be responsible as a family. And in turn, the community worked with that young child, not just the teacher, the extended family, everybody. So when I think about what we're talking about right now, how can parents change? How do young children who are now adults, young adults, we're talking about puberty now, we're talking about maturity. They're not children no more, you know, they're having babies. The organs are now adult organs. That's all part of the description of maturity. When the sex organs become productive, that's maturity. That's adult in some cultures. Some may want to put it to an age, but the body is saying something else. So how are we saying these things to the young child who becomes a teenage parent to try to help them understand how they end up making that mistake and what it is our responsibility as a member of the community to try to get them to better understand and then thereafter be better. Either one of you can respond to that.
No, I'm just thinking of the topic of maturity. And I could remember at 16, a few people my age, the guy may have been a little older, being married. And so they didn't wait for, today you would hear, oh, you get your education, get this, get that, and so forth and so on, but a lot of them still. And I think, and what brought it to my mind, because on WhatsApp my family sent me this thing of my grandmother and my grandfather, 18 and 19 when they got married. And I can remember many people, but their mature level at that age was a lot more mature than what we have now.
Yes.
So it goes back to the maturity. It goes back to, okay, you done what you done? Like you say in the animal kingdom, hey, at a certain time, hey, if you can't survive by yourself now, it's too late. We taught you all we can.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it went that way because we're humans, you know, and somebody's always trying to help, you know, with a kind heart.
Yes.
And we always
So,
talk about, sorry.
So I think I would like to, if there's somebody got some stats on that, on the age of marriage then and the age of marriage now, and how those things worked out, you know,
When we
for
refer
success.
to teenage pregnancy, I think both of my grandparents were teenagers when they had their families, and maybe a lot of others' grandparents were teenagers. I don't think back then any grandparents had children after the age of 20. I think they were probably teenagers, like you said, but at that level of maturity was different. So when we speak of teenage pregnancy now, are we speaking of young mothers who are irresponsible, or are we speaking of their age and just saying because they're teens and having babies? Or is it because they're teenagers and they're not married? What is the stipulation that we're putting on, or the criticism that we're giving teenage pregnancy? Because our grandparents, like I said, were teenagers. So teenage
That's the point
pregnancy
I'm
is
bringing
not
up.
a bad thing. It was probably just different back then because they
Responsibility.
were responsible, and because their husbands were responsible enough to, the men were responsible enough to marry them, make their homes, bring the families together, and that sort of thing. And then we talked about, we could talk about the amount of children, 18, some of them 13, back to back children, 13 children in a row. So the mother may have stopped having the babies at the ages of 35. So they really never had that so-called life, as you call it, that opportunity to be free and to think that there were some freedoms that they should have. Now, these mothers nowadays have children and then still feel that the freedom should be there, the freedom to hang out. My mama should stay home and babysit while I hang, or, the responsibilities are totally different. And this has to be addressed with the mothers. We need to have these conversations with the mothers. When you have these children, what are you having these children with the intentions of doing? Are you intending to raise them, to have decent families with them, to make them accountable citizens, to make them make them have some responsibility in the community? They say the best of those who are most useful in the community.
Yeah.
That should be our end goal for our children, to make them as responsible as possible, as honorable as possible in their communities. And if we're not doing that as mothers, we're lacking in our responsibilities.
Now,
So
in that point you're making, we've got young, irresponsible fathers too.
that too, yep, that too.
It's not just the teenage child that becomes pregnant, and she becomes, like you said,
A disposal
a mother who's not responsible. Right away, what went to my mind, because I understand the part that you made, which was clear. Looking at intellect that's involved with maturity, intellect has to be now something that we cannot leave on the side anymore. Intellect is asking us to consider the thinking of the individual. And if the maturity is not reflected in intellect, then it's not just a physical thing. Because we have to have that component that questions, why are you thinking like that? It's intellect first. Then it's action. So the irresponsible act didn't just come from anywhere. I think some of us need to be made more abreast as responsible parents or adults, whatever we may be, uncles, aunts, and all of those things, part of the community that makes the village. Are we up to date with this type of thinking, so as we wouldn't just criticize the way the child is dressing or the way the child is acting because they don't have a moral compass? Because some of that immoral compass is coming from right in the environment. So how do we address them intellectually? Or do we think they need to be addressed intellectually? Hence, that's why I really love this idea of bringing the young adult thing into this equation rather than looking at youth and children per se. Because when you think about adult says fully matured, grown physically and intellectually, accountable with responsibility. All that comes with an adult. Now, young adult, are we talking to them like that?
And I think that's the point right there, Cromwell, in terms of the transition from childhood to young adult. What activities? You talked earlier about the rites of passage, right? So what are we engaging our children in that would help them understand this level of responsibility? And so that in itself is an issue. I remember, growing up playing football and being in youth groups. It was made very clear to us.
Yes.
I mean, what your expectation was in terms of a youngster. The whole line about teenage pregnancy wasn't just for girls, it was for the young boys as well. Because you would have that responsibility to carry out caring for that child if, in fact, the young female became pregnant, right?
Yes, yes.
And so it's a huge task, and the breakdown in society has left us with a slight void. Because even some of the coaches and football and organizations, I'm not sure if they're delivering this level of awareness or maturity to the young people in which they're instructing, they're guiding. And that's part of our responsibility in terms of, hey, what would be the outcome should you make a mistake or falter? And it's not so much the mistake, it's how we pick ourselves up and move on.
Yes.
And I think that's the greatest challenge before us.
Yes.
Helping young people to understand that it's okay to make a mistake, but where do we go from here? How do we begin to build on the error that we made, or the setback, if you will? I don't like to even call it an error, somewhat of a setback. And begin to move forward. I think that's part of our charge, rather than saying, you faltered and you went here. What can we do to enhance the current status or situation of that young person so that they move to the next space without penalizing them or make them feel that they're less than? Because we do know that there are many young people who are very mature. And so it's not all of them, it's a percentage of them. And with that population, and mind you, let's be real now, there were some who were very mature, who are very responsible, who still falter, right? Who still would end up becoming pregnant or shocking some responsibility along the way.
Yes.
So, it's a cross-section of people. We're human beings. And so we're going to find a variety of people. But by and large, I think the population that we're speaking about are those persons who are totally irresponsible from the standpoint of knowing and engaging in activities and behavior, knowing the consequences of what comes later. That's where our charge is, and how helping people to better understand, where we need to go.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't always take these mistakes that are made, or where they feel like it's a mistake, as being something that's unforgivable.
Absolutely.
We should always be forgiven.
Absolutely.
We should always, not look at it or not look down on it, not be judgmental on it, because everybody's circumstances are different. So if, as a community, again, we just show support. That's all we need to do. As a community, we need to up our support levels. We've all dropped the ball at some point in time where we know we're not doing what we're capable of doing. We're not doing more. We should be doing more than we're doing. Everybody's comfortable. Everybody's comfortable, and it's not in my backyard, or it's okay, I don't have to worry about it.
Right.
But we should be that village. We should be that village once again. We should be looking to our neighbor to see if they need assistance. We should be looking to see, you mentioned support groups. I mean, it's a lot of support groups out there, but are they even offering the intellect that's needed for these, rather than a financial handout? Are we giving guidance? We have financial assistance. Are we giving something along with the financial assistance that we give? Are we giving something that shows, what to do with your finances that you receive?
Yes.
We definitely, as a community, can do a lot better. We always look to the government. We always look to, to lay blame on everybody else for when we're not meeting the things that we need to meet. But it's always been a community effort back in the day that kept us raised up.
Sure.
We didn't rely on government for everything.
You're right.
The community reached in, and we grabbed each other's hands, we pulled each other along, and we supported families the way they should have been supported, and we moved forward. So we just need to get back to that.
To underscore your point, Trace, there's a wonderful article in the paper today, the World Gazette, I think in the Living section.
Yes.
And it's an article about Ms. Jacobs.
Ms. Jacobs,
so the
yes.
young lady who is taking on the role of a foster parent. I mean, phenomenal. I think that's the point that you're making, right? I mean, so she's assumed this responsibility.
Wow.
Excuse me. And there are times when, okay, her parents step in, and relatives step in, just to ensure that this young child receives the level of support that's needed at this particular time. Commendable.
Yes.
Commendable, and it's noteworthy, and it's not about looking for recognition or financial assistance or anything like that. So she's taking it upon herself, and I think it's those kinds of activities too that will allow us to change the current dynamics of where we are. And it's not a public thing where the public has to know in terms of receiving that level of recognition. She's doing it out of her heart. She's sacrificing,
It's not looking for
making a
credit.
commitment. That's what it was like,
Yeah.
back in the day when people would do it out of their heart and very caring to ensure that the young people got what they needed.
Yeah. But we also have to look out for that manipulation too, because it's a lot of that exists too.
Right.
People who you always say, you can't help somebody who can't help themselves. Sometimes, there are people out there who will manipulate that situation and continuously not get better.
Right.
Not get better, or not show any effort to help themselves.
Wanna
So
get
we
better.
just have to be careful also that there's that kind of element where, you can be given, and there's also that person who can take,
advantage.
and they're not still becoming that productive citizen, or they're not still making any type of effort to be a responsible citizen. So, you have to weigh it out for yourself.
Part and parcel of that balance of learning is reward and punishment too,
Yeah.
In the context of rejection of good advice, you shouldn't be rewarded with good responses.
That's right.
You have to, we're sending the wrong signal to a person who denies good guidance. You can't say you're still going to be okay and continue to get when you reject or you disrespect what you're being given, regardless if it's in money, intellectual capacity as relates to information. It could be support on various levels. When someone is now front and center on that, and like you said, playing the game, what, do we become enablers and make them feel it's okay?
One of my
When do
favorite
we step
sayings.
up?
One of my favorite sayings. My children hear me saying it all the time. They say, you know, what's poor? And I went to a convention once, and they said POOR, passing over opportunities repeatedly, meaning you can be receiving and getting handouts, but you're continuously passing over great opportunities to bring you out of that level of poverty.
Yes.
You're constantly passing over opportunities that are being handed out to you, waiting for what? What is it that you're waiting for?
Yes.
You've been given it. It's right there in front of you. All that you need is there. You have all the basic needs. Now you just have to make your move and do what it is that's required of you.
Part of the old adage years ago from good elders used to say, you know, you may not think you need to take this advice now, but when you hit the road and you hit it hard,
Oh yeah,
you're not going to need me to tell you. You're going to feel it.
you can feel it.
So if you don't hear it, you're going to feel.
Yep.
Now, that wasn't too much of a long story.
Yeah, it's not a long
How
story.
many of us live to know that that's true?
Yeah.
You know? So when I think about how are we going to change as a person who's, like for instance, I love the idea of watching the natural development within my family personally. And my family is no different than anyone else's family. From the point of view of knowing where I started, what it is that I always said I don't want to do when I get married.
Yep.
Because I did see some things that I don't want to repeat in the family. So you try your best to
Avoid.
get those things right.
Yeah.
And along the way, you're making mistakes. But through patience and perseverance, you get to learn, and then you start having children, and then you watch your children putting into effect what it is you've already set as a stage for the family. But we're talking about in our best intentions and what we want for a better future. All that's clear. The mistakes come naturally. But how many of us want to pull away from weak habits that we have as parents? Stop screaming at your child. Stop hitting them upside the head. Stop shouting when you don't need to be shouting. Stop telling them that giving language to them that is counterproductive in you trying to give them guidance, because your messaging is just unacceptable messaging. So now you watch your own children and they come up doing it a little better than
A
you.
little bit better. Yep.
Sure.
How able are we willing to say, we're growing, we're changing, man?
Yeah.
And I don't need to talk to my grandchildren like I used to talk to my children,
Sure.
because it's getting better. And I don't need to shout no more.
Sure.
And I don't need to hit them.
Improvements in
And I don't need to hit them in the wrong places, like upside the head. Remember years ago?
Oh, come
I'll
on.
go upside your head, right? A little message will get you straightened out. Do we really want to have our children to obey us by giving them messages like
I'm getting better. I'm getting better at
You
that.
see what I'm saying? So what I'm getting at is this message and this learning
Sure.
is for all of us.
Sure.
How willing are we to be honest
Yeah.
and say, you know, hey, boy,
Patience.
this
There's
is
lot
a
of
hard
patience.
pill to swallow, boy. I used to be, look, I remember one time, one of my children started crying when I gave him direction. And I'm saying, what are you crying for? They said, listen, I'm telling you, this person said to me, listen, I heard what you were saying, you know, but why are you shouting at me like that? Well, I stopped right away, boy. I said, this boy is crying, buckets of tears. It wasn't because he was hurt. He thought that he was intelligent enough to take advice without me shouting at him. And he simply said to me, why are you shouting at me like that?
Yes.
Boy, that was a message to me,
Yes.
boy. So I'm saying, how many of us are
Pay
willing
attention.
to honestly say that
Yeah.
when one of our own who are now listening to us are saying, hey, y'all got to
Not
know how to do
necessary.
better.
Sure.
That's right.
Because I'm in a better space. I don't know about you, Daddy,
Sure.
but you don't need to be shouting to me like that.
Yeah.
and their lives to changes in the family.
Yeah.
You know?
The evolution.
Yeah, man.
And we have to be humble enough to accept that. We have to be humble enough as parents to know that sometimes we'll just not got it right.
Yeah.
You know, our children are telling us, and we
Yes.
have to listen. Sometimes we don't have it right.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah,
we can
really.
listen and
But
we can
that's the
learn.
beautiful growth in the family,
That's
though.
the
Even
growth,
though
yeah.
it's sometimes a hard pill to swallow, but that's pure progress.
It is
Sure.
progress.
We're
That's
seeing the next generation saying we don't need to go out in the neighborhood and act stupid. I could talk to my daddy, and his now got to listen to me
Sure.
because I'm not like him.
I think, I know, and I think many of the youth are
It's funny.
saying that. You
Yes.
know,
You
give
hear
me a
it.
chance.
You do hear
I'm
it.
different. You know,
Yes.
I'm my own unique individual.
Yes.
You know, respect me for who I am.
Yeah.
And you have to pull back to say, you know what? Hey, you got a
You
point.
have to pay attention. I
Yeah.
mean, I think about the young man out there now, the ones who are involved in these things like gang violence and what have you. And has anybody actually listened to what it is that's on their mind? Listen to what it is that they are looking for, or what it is that they may be seeking in life, or that's missing. We already can, as adults, assume that there's a lot of things that are missing, because that just seems like the norm. If they're doing these things that are so far out of character, that's taking them right out of the souls, then we already know what's missing. For the love of God, we know that that's missing.
Yes.
We know that the guidance is missing, but what is it? Where's the frame of mind that they are in when you can take another one's life and you so cold-hearted about it, and you could just go about your life. You could go about your daily life feeling okay. Something's missing. It's a lot missing. I don't know what it is,
No,
but
you touching on that. This brings to mind. This is a good closure. We've got 20 minutes left for this
Okay.
discussion, and we're on the last question that's been tabled here for our discussion, which is recognizing that it was always neighborhood rivalry.
It was always,
It was
yes.
always rivalry and loyalty to our group, man. Uphill against downhill,
Yeah,
man.
boys, and-
We didn't carry a baseball bat or a knife, but we carried a football and said, I'm better than you, boy. And you can't do this here, this, that, and the other. And we're all about this here in the community. And we're doing this here, you guys are not. And we always we were like that.
Yeah.
But the dynamic today is that we're confrontational to the point where violence is egregious. And like you said, Mr. Reed, we know something's going
Something's
missing.
wrong, yeah,
How can we address that dynamic that we know is a reality in front of us? What it is that we must address and be frank about?
It's the real conversation. I know you may hear many of the men who are incarcerated. You know, you hear the stories, and I've been at Westgate on a few occasions, as well as a correctional facility. It's that's the father figure that's missing, right? Like they've missed those early years of that comfort, the love of their dad,
Yeah.
the love of
the
the
lap we
parent.
talked about earlier.
that- yeah, you're right.
The lap,
Tracy,
the,
you're
the lap of the
100% right.
father,
And
100%.
I mean, I really believe it's a sense of love, fatherly love, humanly love, family love. And so it goes on for so long. And to be quite honest, many of them at an earlier stage don't even realize what's missing. They may not even be able to articulate it. Because oftentimes their love has been substituted for what? For something else. And that love comes in the form of quality time, right? It comes in the form of conversation and caring around the table. Just as you pointed out earlier, those little things, they mean so much down the road. But if it's void at a very early age, then they really don't know what it is that they're missing until they get in some situations or some circumstances and say, well, where are you? Where have you been? You haven't been in my life. Or this person has been influencing me, or this person has been influencing me, to the extent that they make decisions on the basis of what they've learned.
And I used to think a lot of that was excuses. I used to think, father figure. My grandmother raised 13 babies without a father figure in the presence of all of them's lives. So does that mean that they should have been out there wreaking havoc? No.
No.
So not always, each
Sure.
situation is different. But
Sure.
I think society brought on the father figure thing, so it started to become an excuse for young men to say, my father is not around. Your mother is also around. So your mother, if she didn't have the father in her life, would be no excuse to not be able to raise that child properly so that he can still respect his father, still respect her, and
Sure.
still respect the community.
Sure.
It's no reason or excuse after a while. You can't take it as an excuse that the father is not there, so all hell's going to break loose.
No, right.
You know,
Or the male presence. Because
Or the male presence.
when you look
because
at
there
the
definitely should be some male presence,
Absolutely.
even if it's a community
because when
male.
you look at the demographics, particularly the black community, it's devastating.
Yes.
When you look at the number of black males that's incarcerated, the number of kids who are growing up in single-parent households, it's definitely like, it's not like it was years growing up when we
Yeah.
were coming through. So there is a profound impact in terms of the social dynamics of black males in the society. There's no question about that. It's whether or not we can provide the level of support to ensure that it can compensate for those deficiencies.
Yeah.
And again, as I said, the social organizations, the clubs that we had growing up, there were men who played, who were very
Intricate roles,
instrumental
yeah.
in the development of young boys. We have organizations today, but the extent to which they're involved raises the question. Are we addressing the needs of young boys as it relates to the society across the board? Because society has changed. It has changed drastically.
And what bothers me is that a lot of those male figures who say that the male figure was missing out of their lives, if they're incarcerated, they're now missing out of their own kids' lives. So the cycle gets worse.
and let
the
me s-
cycle gets more and more vicious because you haven't learned anything from your father not being in your life.
But I also believe it's
So what is it that, where do we go from there?
Well, part of it, I
At
think-
what point do we?
And I do believe part of it is a multifaceted approach from the standpoint that there's no one remedy or panacea to
No one
to the-
remedy,
I mean,
yeah.
so I mean, even from a government standpoint or legislative standpoint, I believe, you know, let's take for example, a male is incarcerated because of alimony, not paying.
Child support
Child
or what have you,
support.
right?
Well, he's incarcerated, and I know Justice Wolf is doing a great job in terms of trying to reform the system and,
Yes.
and provide methods and remedies to quell this problem, right? But we've got to find a way to be solution oriented, and I think it needs to be creative. So I think part of it is ending that cycle, you know what I mean? And finding a way to work with those males who are incarcerated to be able to provide
Yes, yes.
some form of assistance to the family. I was listening to Dr. Simmons' show in terms of All Fronts, and they were talking about the brothers who are at Westgate or the correctional facility and the food that they prepared on at the farm. Well, what's left over, they dispose of. So the question was asked, well, why can't we give it to those families who were supposed to provide
Survival, yeah.
support for? I mean, so the resolutions are there. It's perhaps enacting or bringing into fruition some of the ideas that are out there, which are going to require a bit of courage. If we're going to get out of this space, it's got to be some courageous and advantageous decisions that need to be made.
Yes. Brother Imam, how are you looking at this point we're at right now on this subject?
On the subject in which we're talking, my mind was going back. I had read something on adultery and fornication. And what I read was that the worst adultery and fornication is that of truth, is that of the Word of God. Where people take it right out of context.
Yeah, adulterated.
Yep. Take it right out of context, misuse it and abuse it.
Yes.
Yes.
And so we have the situation in which we are in now, whereas the clear truth has been sliced up, cut up, misused, abused. We can look at the U.S. election here recently and see how, they stole the election. People just continue lying, straight-faced lies.
Yeah.
And so all this is filtered on. All the young people were not mature enough to decipher this information are getting caught up in it. Well, they do that.
This is a lot.
Somebody's making money off of drugs. That's the easy way out for me, so I'm going to try and do it. You know, it's not stopped. So the truth has been
Adulterated.
adulterated.
Like you said.
Yes, yes. And, you know, when I look at some experiences that I've had in my profession, I'm remembering this one situation that really gave me a lot of confidence in why particularly the black woman survived with her family when she didn't have the type of strong support that she should have gotten. And you go look at these statistics, more black families suffered in those conditions than any other families. A woman came to my barbershop one time, and she went to my broom closet. I said, where this woman good, man? she knew where my broom closet was. Rather than sitting on in the seat waiting for a child to get a haircut, she went to my broom closet and came up with the broom.
Start sweeping.
No, boy. She said, hey, where you been, boy? What time you supposed to be up here to this barbershop? But I found out that this woman was about to deal with this boy right there. So I said, no, lady, look, I can't let you do that to you with your broom. I understand that you may want to correct this boy right now, but I can't let you do it with the broom. So she said, listen, boy, let me let you know what I'm about to have this guy to learn. His daddy's not on the scene. I'm his mama and his daddy.
Okay.
And I gave him direction, and he should have been here a long time ago before now. He should have had his haircut and been back on. I want to straighten this guy out because he's not going to do what he wants to do and lose his life. I'm straightening him out right now. I said, Lord, have mercy.
Yeah.
This woman was serious. She said, I'd rather give him something now for him to continue on the road that is going in disrespecting me and my guidance as his mama and his father, and him lose his life in the future. Yeah. No, she never abused him that night, that afternoon, but she gave him a little something. Oh, yeah. And I said to myself, you know, this woman is doing the best she could to try to save this boy because I'm pretty sure that wasn't the first time he done that. And the fact that she came there with the discomfort in her mind like she was at her wit's end.
Yeah.
I'm certain.
Enough.
But what I admired that she accepted, I'm the mother and the father. I'm going to do the best I can to get him to take guidance from both sides with a moral compass. I'm pretty certain she was trying to say, look, you may not have a father, but that don't mean you're not going to get the understanding of how you should be as a man.
Yeah.
That's what that woman was trying to tell her son. And I knew that, man. And I'm telling you, I would never forget that story. And the woman, I'm telling you, I never blamed her for trying to use the broom. I just had to make sure she wasn't going to be abusive in front of me without me trying to protect something, you know? But as a woman, as a mother, and as a disciplinarian, as a responsible person, she was all of that and more.
Sure.
So those are the pictures that I believe you need to make sense of, rather than saying, this woman went crazy. I never thought she was going crazy. She said, hey, boy, I'm having difficulty, and you are not going to do this here while I'm on my watch. Boy. So I said, good God Almighty. So I'll rather have that portion rather than nothing at all.
Yes.
Or a bad example. Because she wasn't a bad example. She was doing the best she could. I'm pretty sure she was.
And you know, that says a lot because, in all honesty, I mean, many of our parents, I mean, they would do and have been doing the best that they could based on the circumstances. And so even when children make those irrash decisions, you know, one would be quick to say, well, you know, his mother such and such or his father such and such. But sometimes that's not really the case either.
Yeah,
You know,
man.
they would have given their best, their utmost to ensure that this child reaches the level of guidance that's needed, the direction that's expected.
Yeah.
But children are children, or young adults are young adults, and they have a mind of their own. They're going to do what they want to do.
Yes, yes.
It's-
And I have to say that I monitored that young man and his mother. He didn't go off the rails, you know. Nor did he feel as though his mama done something terrible to him that day.
Expected it.
He understood what his mother was doing.
It was that tough love.
And he did not get treatment from me as embarrassing him or anything like that.
Right.
Because I tried to understand the situation so all parties can get something out of the equation. And I, being a responsible person, I just couldn't let that lady use that broom like she wanted to. I couldn't. Not what I knew and understood, but I wasn't going to tell her, hey, she's wrong. It's, in fact, the woman's in the man's life, in the young boy's life.
Sure.
She's in his life. I mean, I'm giving her kudos for being that concerned to protect that young man. Now, how much more could she have learned? I'm pretty sure, get her in the right environment, she'll be a good candidate to take good guidance. I'm pretty sure, because she was already acting responsible as a parent.
Natural.
Well, we've got about 7 minutes left. I'm gonna give you all 2 minutes to wrap up the program. Starting with you, brother Imam.
Okay. Well, indeed, it was a good conversation. I think we have to realize that each and every one of us have good within us. We were created that way. And as long as we can stick with that goodness, we can defeat the enemy of man, of mankind.
Yes.
If we can stick with that goodness. If we don't stick with that goodness, then we're getting, so it says, outside of the garden, outside of our paradise, our place of peace. So I think it would be good that we understand that God placed in each and every one of us goodness. And our life is to develop that goodness to its utmost. Our moral standards, judgment, intellectual side, all of that. I think we just have to stick with what we know is good, what we know is right, what we know is correct. And we can go a long way from that point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you for allowing me to be a part of the conversation. I believe that the family is the solution to our issues in society. Fix it and we will prosper. I believe the fixing requires ongoing conversation and dialogue, both conventional and unconventional methods. I think we need to it's a constant in terms of bringing the family together. It's not a loud conversation. I think it's family by family. I think we have to do what we can to save ourselves and work with one another. It does require patience. These are trying times all around. We have to help ourselves as best we can, seek the assistance to help if needed, but also feel conscious enough to want to assist and lend the support to those that need it without making it a show. Because I think it's in the final analysis, it's about dignity and maintaining that level of confidentiality and respect. And so I think if we can just focus on the family in our own spaces, one day at a time with our loved ones, settle our differences as best we can without making it a show and an issue. I think that, there's no real written rules or norms to bring resolution to this. It's about plugging away at it. And it's going to take time. It's generational. There will be no quick solutions. It's just going to require time. And I think the more we concentrate on family as a people, starting from our own unit and extending out to our social organizations, to our religious organizations, I think we'll begin to make the progress.
Ms. Sharif?
Yeah, I have my favorites. I didn't even know where these quotes come from sometimes, but it might have come from one of the khutbahs Brother Imam gave. I don't know if I can remember, but word for the youth. Take advantage of 5 things. It will be take advantage of your youth before you become old. Take advantage of your health before you become sick. Take advantage of your richness before you become poor. Take advantage of your free time before you become too busy. Take advantage of life before death.
Wow.
And our community is experiencing a lot of death. And I think a lot of our conversation, we have to speak the truth.
The stories of the prophet.
There you go. I knew it was from something. It stuck with me.
Mercy. Mercy.
We have to speak the truth about death to our children. And I think that it has to be clear, and we have to speak calmly without eliciting fear. We have to let them know the reality of death. We have a lot of mental challenges that our young people are going through right now as a result of the experiences that they're having with relation to death, losing someone that's close to them. I want to invite every young person to pray. Prayer and prayer and prayer and more prayer. You have a direct connection to go through prayer. And that's the best advice I can give to any young person who is seeking any type of knowledge, they are confused about anything, that is the best advice that I can give.
Well, looking at what the subject of the night was, young adult, the family and the young adult, you know, in hearing you all wrap up, my mind went to the gospel and the revelation of Al-Quran to the Muslim, to Muhammad the Prophet. Both scriptures speaks about a time where people will be acting so wayward, they would be appearing to be drunk, and they would not have had a lick of intoxicant. They wouldn't have had no drink or any alcohol that would have made them drunk. But their mind would be so befogged and off balance that they won't be able to manage their self. What has been proven by those who have studied scriptures with insightfulness has declared that the intoxicant that's causing our people, adults and young adults, to be off balance is the pressures of the world. And some of us are so off balance that we can't do the right thing. Whatever it should be done. Some of us are so guilty, and many of us don't know why. Why we are not so capable of managing our fears, because we don't understand the pressures of the world, how it's impacting on our lives. So as a family, as a responsible adult in the family, we must not see ourselves separate from the problem. Because it didn't say they'll see young children like that. They said you'll see people like that, young and old, moving around as though they're off balance, as though they're drunk, and wouldn't have had a stick of liquor or an intoxicant. Why? Because the pressures of the world are dragging them down. So I say, let us continue to be real about stories like these, subjects like these, and continue to have dialogue on this level. Perception for progress. And 2 months from now, we're going to have another discussion on another subject with the same realities. Thank you very much for tuning in and being a viewer and a listener. Have the rest of a great evening.